Welcome to Conspiracist. Today we're undertaking a deep dive into a pretty significant hypothesis that governments have intentionally concealed evidence of psychic warfare experiments.
We'll be looking at historical documents, various accounts connected to government research into what's often called anomalous human cognition, basically psychic abilities.
Right. And the core question is whether positive findings, if any, were deliberately hidden.
Our mission here is really to objectively evaluate the information we have, the reasoning behind these claims of concealment. We're not taking sides.
Exactly. Just laying out the evidence as best we can.
And we'll focus primarily on programs like the CIA's MKUltra and the Army's Project Stargate. We'll also touch on parapsychology generally and potential military uses.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Where did this government interest in, let's call it mind manipulation, actually start?
Well, the records show pretty early interest. Back in 1950, there was a plan approved by the DCI for CIA interrogation teams.
Interrogation teams, what were they supposed to be doing?
The plan involved using polygraphs, drugs, and hypnotism, ostensibly to improve interrogation.
So manipulating mental states right from the start, essentially for intelligence gathering.
It seems that way. You have to remember the context, too. Early Cold War, intense pressure for intelligence.
And this interest didn't stay limited to just interrogation, did it?
No, it appears to have broadened. By 1951, there's a memo about a meeting. CIA, Foreign Intelligence, discussing a shared interest in, and this is the term used, individual mind control.
Mind control, that's a big leap from just enhancing interrogations.
It is. It suggests the ambition was growing, moving beyond just getting information, maybe towards influencing behavior itself. And the international collaboration is notable, too.
Then things seem to get, significantly darker with figures like George White.
Right. Starting around 1952, his name pops up managing CIA safe houses.
But not typical safe houses for meetings.
No, these were apparently used for testing drugs like LSD on American citizens who had no idea they were being experimented on, unwitting subjects.
That's deeply disturbing. The ethical implications are huge right from the outset.
Absolutely. It highlights the extreme secrecy and the, frankly, disregard for individual rights in pursuit of these goals.
Which brings us squarely to MKUltra. There's a 1952 report mentioning something called artichoke interrogation methods.
Yes, Artichoke was an earlier program, sort of a precursor or part of the early stages leading into MKUltra. This report claimed success using narcosis, drug-induced stupor, combined with hypnosis.
On who?
On suspected doubled Russian agents. The aim was apparently to induce regression, get information, and then maybe induce amnesia about the interrogation itself.
So extract information and then wipe the memory. Wow.
It shows a clear effort to refine techniques for both getting information and potentially altering memory for counterintelligence.
And the experimentation just kept escalating under MKUltra, particularly with LSD.
It did. In 1956, we see Sidney Gottlieb, a central figure, approving LSD testing on federal prisoners in Atlanta.
Official approval to test on prisoners.
Yes. It shows how central LSD became to their research into mind-altering substances and again raises those ethical flags about using vulnerable populations.
And Gottlieb saw potential beyond just getting prisoners or agents to talk, right?
Definitely. He apparently considered using LSD covertly on high-ranking officials. The idea was its temporary effects might influence their decisions or performance during critical moments, like speeches or meetings.
A kind of undetectable chemical influence operation. That's quite an ambition.
It reflects this strategic thinking about psychoactive drugs as potential tools of statecraft, operating in the shadows.
And it wasn't just LSD they were looking at, was it? There were other sort of physiological experiments.
Right. Documents mention experiments involving intravenous administration of barbiturates in one arm and amphetamines in the other, simultaneously.
Downers and uppers at the same time. What would be the goal there?
It suggests they were trying to induce very specific, perhaps confusing or suggestible, mental states, a more complex level of psychopharmacological manipulation.
Hypnosis was also a big part of it too, it seems.
Yes, very much so. Declassified MKUltra documents show they studied hypnosis for all sorts of things. Inducing anxiety, trying to increase learning speed or recall, even enhancing powers of observation and memory.
Basically trying to weaponize suggestion for intelligence work.
That appears to be the goal, yes. Leveraging the subconscious.
Did anyone inside the CIA raise concerns about this, particularly the unwitting testing?
There were some internal rumblings. A 1963 CIA Inspector General's report did lead to a re-examination of using unwitting Americans these drug tests. So some level of internal ethical concern was emerging, even if it took a while.
And the fallout continued for decades, didn't it? Like with Gottlieb's deposition.
That's right. In 1983, Gottlieb gave testimony in a civil lawsuit related to CIA-funded projects run by Dr. Ewan Cameron up in Montreal, which involved highly controversial psychiatric experiments. It shows the long tail of these programs.
Even the CIA itself seemed to be trying to piece together its own past later on.
Yes, in 1979, they actually wrote to Gottlieb, who was retired by then, asking for his help with an internal inquiry.
What did they want to know?
They wanted to, and I quote, investigate its past involvement with drugs, with emphasis on the use of drugs on unwitting subjects. They wanted to assess the harm done and get details on the safe house operations.
A sort of internal reckoning, perhaps, or maybe just covering their bases legally?
Could be a mix of both. It certainly shows a later recognition within the agency that they needed to understand what had actually happened.
And just the sheer range of substances they looked into under MKUltra is, well, staggering.
It really is. Beyond LSD, you have heroin, morphine, temazepam that was under MK Search, mescaline, psilocybin, scopolamine, alcohol, sodium pentothal, whole pharmacy.
It demonstrates a really broad, almost scattergun approach to finding anything that might influence the mind.
Exactly. A very comprehensive search for behavioral modification tools. And this was all happening across a network, hospitals, labs, those clandestine safe houses we mentioned.
A widespread, coordinated effort.
Seems so.
Let's talk about the human cost and the ethics more directly. The Frank Olson case is probably the most infamous example.
Yes, Frank Olson, an Army chemist working on biological warfare research, who was secretly given LSD, likely by someone connected to MKUltra, and died about a week later after falling from a hotel window. The circumstances remain debated, but the LSD dosing is confirmed.
And reports suggest he had expressed doubts about the morality of the work before his death.
That's correct. Sources indicate he had ethical concerns, which adds another tragic layer to his story. It hints at internal dissent or moral conflict within these programs.
His family eventually received a settlement, right? And apologies.
They did. $750,000, and apologies came from President Ford and CIA Director Colby. But crucially, those apologies were limited. They focused specifically on the failure to get informed consent for the LSD dosing.
So not an apology for the entire program or its goals, just for that specific procedural failure in Olson's case.
Precisely. It addressed one aspect, but left the larger questions about MKUltra's overall conduct unanswered, at least officially at that moment.
Then came the 1977 Senate Select Committee report, the Church Committee findings. That really blew the lid off, didn't it?
It did. The report was scathing. It detailed the deliberate destruction of MKUltra records, which is a huge problem for understanding the full scope.
Why destroy the records?
Well, the obvious implication is to prevent disclosure, to hide potentially illegal or deeply unethical activities. The committee also confirmed the widespread failure to get informed consent, the uncontrolled nature of many experiments, and a lack of follow-up to see what happened to the subjects.
So we might never actually know the full impact.
The committee basically concluded that. They suggested fatalities beyond Olson might have occurred, but the destroyed records make it impossible to know for sure. A systematic pattern of unethical research and cover-up.
Okay, so that's MKUltra, a dark chapter focused largely on drugs, hypnosis, and mind manipulation. Let's shift gears now to Project Stargate. This was different, wasn't it? More focused on psychic phenomena.
Yes, Stargate was the U.S. Army's unit specifically looking into psychic research, often called remote viewing. It seems to have grown out of some earlier CIA interest in the same area.
So the government's interest in the unconventional continued, just shifted focus slightly.
Exactly. It moved towards exploring if psychic abilities could be harnessed, specifically for intelligence gathering.
One of the early figures they looked at was Uri Geller, the famous psychic.
He was. In 1973, the CIA tested him over about 8 days at the Stanford Research Institute, SRI.
And what did they conclude?
The report's conclusion was interesting. It said Geller demonstrated paranormal perceptual ability in a convincing and ambiguous manner.
Convincing and ambiguous? That sounds like hedging their bets.
It does, doesn't it? It reflects the difficulty perhaps in getting solid, undeniable proof, even when results seemed intriguing. It was an exploratory phase.
After Geller, they started recruiting others, people specifically called remote viewers.
Yes, individuals like Rosemary Smith and Joseph McMonigle became key figures.
And there are some striking anecdotal claims, like Rosemary Smith locating a downed Soviet bomber.
That's one of the famous stories associated with Stargate. Smith reportedly used remote viewing to pinpoint the location of a crashed Soviet Tu-95 bomber in Zaire, which allowed the U.S. to recover sensitive technology.
If true, that's a huge intelligence success attributed directly to psychic means.
It would be. These kinds of operational anecdotes are often cited by proponents as evidence of remote viewing's practical value, though independent verification is often difficult.
Just to be clear for listeners, what exactly is remote viewing supposed to be?
The definition used is essentially the attempt to gather information about a target, a person, place, object, event that's distant in space, or even time using only psychic abilities, so perception beyond the known senses.
And they tried to systematize this, make it more like a procedure.
Yes, particularly with Ingo Swann at SRI. He developed what's called coordinate remote viewing, or CRV. It was an attempt to create a structured methodology, a protocol to make the process more rigorous and potentially teachable.
Trying to turn it from a maybe talent into a technique.
Pretty much, moving towards a more systematic framework.
Another famous example often mentioned is Pat Price and the Semipalatinsk site.
Right. Price, another viewer associated with SRI, reportedly remote viewed a Soviet nuclear facility at Semipalatinsk. His description included specific details, like a very large metal sphere being constructed.
And how accurate was that?
Well, reports claim his description, including drawings he made particularly of a large gantry crane, closely matched intelligence, gathered later, some of which was apparently confirmed in publications like Aviation Week. We even have comparisons showing a CIA artist's sketch from satellite photos next to Price's drawing, and the similarities are noted.
So specific, verifiable details seemingly obtained through unconventional means. That's compelling, at least on the surface.
It's certainly one of the cornerstone cases used to argue for the validity and potential of remote viewing in intelligence.
This led the military to take it more seriously internally.
It seems so. By 1978, the Army's Intelligence and Security Command, INSCOM, set up its own in-house remote viewing unit at Fort Meade.
Bringing it inside the military intelligence structure.
Yes, moving it from external research contracts toward being an actual operational capability they could deploy.
How did they try to ensure the viewers weren't just guessing or using prior knowledge?
A key part of the protocol was viewer blindness. They used target IDs, sometimes geographic coordinates, sometimes just random numbers or tags that gave the viewer no clues about the actual target. The idea was to isolate the supposed psychic channel.
And feedback was important, too.
Absolutely. After a session, the viewer would typically be given feedback on the actual target. This was seen as crucial for them to learn to differentiate accurate psychic impressions from mental noise and generally hone their ability.
What about this mental noise? Did they have a term for that?
Yes, they called it analytical overlay, or AOL. That's when the conscious mind starts interpreting the raw, perhaps fragmented remote viewing data and fills in the gaps with imagination, assumptions, or existing memories.
Like trying to make sense of a fuzzy picture and drawing conclusions that aren't really there.
Exactly. Distinguishing true signal from this AOL was considered a major challenge in the process.
Okay, so they had protocols, internal units, some seemingly impressive results. Why was Project Stargate eventually terminated in 1995?
The official reason followed an independent review commissioned by the CIA, conducted by the American Institutes for Research, AIR.
And what did this independent review find?
It found that, yes, a statistically significant effect was observed in the laboratory experiments. Results were better than chance. However, and this is the key part, the review concluded it remained unclear if remote viewing had actually been demonstrated as a real paranormal phenomenon.
So statistically interesting, but not proven.
Essentially. And crucially, they questioned its operational value. They weren't convinced it provided information reliable or specific enough for actionable intelligence gathering.
What were the specific issues raised?
Things like the unknown origin or nature of the effect they couldn't explain how it might work, and a lack of interjudge reliability.
Meaning?
Meaning different remote viewers looking at the same target often produced very different, sometimes contradictory information. If you can't get consistent results, it's hard to rely on it for intelligence.
That makes sense. And you have to factor in the general scientific skepticism towards this kind of research, right?
Absolutely. Parapsychology has always faced significant skepticism from the mainstream academic community. The lack of repeatable experiments under rigorous conditions, the lack of a plausible mechanism, these are major hurdles. This broader scientific climate undoubtedly influenced the assessment and funding decisions.
So where does that leave parapsychology research now in the U.S.?
Much of it has moved into the private sphere. Funded by private institutions or individuals, we saw the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, PREOR, close in 2007 after nearly 3 decades, studying psychokinesis mind over matter. That was a significant closure.
And some of this skepticism perhaps stems from flaws in the very early research in the field.
That's certainly a factor. Early parapsychology pioneers like J.B. Rhine faced later criticism for methodological issues, potential sensory leakage, inadequate controls in experiments. These historical problems cast a long shadow and made later researchers face an uphill battle for credibility.
Okay, so we have evidence of government research, both into manipulating minds and exploring psychic abilities. But official programs were eventually shut down, citing lack of reliable results or ethical issues. But the conspiracy aspect is about concealment, right? What if the story isn't just it didn't work, but something else?
Exactly. This brings us to alternative interpretations. One prominent idea, explored in books like Mirage Men, flips the script.
How so?
It suggests that maybe the government isn't hiding successful psychic warfare tech. Instead, maybe it's intentionally creating or promoting stories about UFOs, psychic phenomena, that sort of thing.
Why would they do that?
As a cover, as disinformation. To distract from or explain away sightings of highly advanced but purely conventional secret aircraft or other black project technologies.
So the paranormal stories are a smokescreen for secret but mundane tech.
That's the hypothesis. A kind of psychological operation directed at the public, and maybe even other parts of the government, to maintain secrecy around advanced aerospace projects, for example.
The author of Mirage Men mentions a personal experience.
Yes, seeing unexplained objects in Yosemite. He considers mundane things like balloons, but notes behavior that didn't quite fit. It illustrates how ambiguous these sightings can be and how they could potentially be exploited for disinformation purposes.
A complex game of deception, possibly misleading everyone.
That's the picture painted by the Mirage Men idea. Deep compartmentalization and strategic misdirection.
We should also probably touch on why people might be inclined to believe in psychic phenomena in the first place, from a psychological perspective.
That's relevant too. Research in cognitive science suggests certain biases might predispose us to paranormal beliefs.
Like what?
Things like mentalizing, our tendency to attribute intentions or agency to things, even inanimate objects. Also, mind-body dualism, the intuitive feeling that the mind is separate from the physical body. And teleological thinking, seeing purpose or design in events.
So our natural ways of thinking might make paranormal explanations seem more plausible.
Potentially, yes. And cultural factors like exposure to religious frameworks that include supernatural concepts can also play a role.
And then there's personal experience, anecdotes.
Right. We see these online, like the Reddit user you mentioned, who described a very detailed dream about future events which then seem to happen. For that individual, the experience can be incredibly convincing.
But anecdote isn't data, scientifically speaking.
Precisely. Compelling on a personal level, but it doesn't meet the standards of scientific evidence control, replicability, ruling out alternative explanations like coincidence or memory biases.
This ties into the ongoing debates about, say, mediums and debunking efforts.
It does. You see discussions about whether there's a moral duty to debunk potentially fraudulent mediums who might exploit grieving people.
But it's complicated, isn't it?
Very. Because some argue many mediums genuinely believe they have abilities. Proving malicious intent is hard. And definitively proving or disproving the claims themselves under rigorous conditions is the core challenge.
Which brings us back to figures like James Randi and his famous challenge.
Exactly. His long-standing offer of $1 million to anyone who could demonstrate psychic powers under controlled, mutually agreed upon scientific conditions. The fact it remained unclaimed for so long speaks volumes about the difficulty of providing that kind of proof, at least from the perspective of scientific skepticism.
So, wrapping this all up, our deep dive into this psychic warfare concealment hypothesis, it really shows a complex picture.
It really does. There's a documented history of government interest, funding, and research into manipulating minds with MKUltra and exploring psychic potential with Stargate. That part isn't really disputed.
But the concealment part, the idea they found something truly effective and hid it, that's where it gets murky.
Very murky. The official record points towards programs being terminated due to ethical breaches, lack of reliable results, or questionable operational value. But, the destruction of records in MKUltra fuels suspicion.
And the anecdotes from Stargate, like the Soviet bomber or Semipalatinsk, keep the possibility alive for some.
Exactly. So you have competing narratives.
Correct.
Was it a genuine but ultimately unsuccessful exploration? Was it a cover-up of something real? Or was it, as the Mirage Men idea suggests, partly a disinformation campaign itself.
The available evidence doesn't give a definitive single answer.
No, it leaves you, the listener, to weigh the documented history against the gaps, the unanswered questions, the alternative theories, and the inherent difficulties in studying these kinds of phenomena scientifically.
It definitely touches on big questions about government secrecy, human potential, and how we decide what's real or possible.
And the power of narratives, whether they come from official reports, whistleblower accounts, or conspiracy theories in shaping our understanding.
Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.